So, heartily welcome everyone to yet another episode of Innovation Circle. For those who are, I see we have quite a few newcomers. So, my name is Mikael Roman. I am the coordinator of ETIN, the ECE Transformative Innovation Network. And this is our live podcast, Innovation Circle, and I'm glad to see that finally, after 12 episodes, we have actually put ourselves in a circle. Karlstad is sitting not along a table, but actually around two tables. That tells me we are improving and we're getting somewhere. This is very much let's call it a half of an experiment itself. It is live podcast where we in various ways try to cover the different aspects of transformative innovation. We have try to have sort of informal discussions on what transformative innovation actually means. And the whole point is to give precisely different perspectives on transformative innovation. So just to give a few examples, we started off with talking about the very concept of transformation. Often we take many of the critical words for granted. So we started off talking about what transformation was. We have also covered the different aspects of transforming, or the aspects of transforming mature industries. We have discussed how to different kinds of demand side policies, how to do procurement. Innovation has procurement. We talked about the place-based innovation, the ways in which innovation plays out in different locations. Is it context specific? Are there generic phenomena, etc.? We talked about social entrepreneurship. We talked about business models, platforms, and circular economy. And we also had a few sessions where we explored new concepts like strategic learning. One thing, though, that I discovered when we have where we now are on our 12th episode, as we actually never talked about innovation itself. Innovation is a concept that has or a practice even that is under constant development, and it's driven by the ways in which contexts change. So one of the questions here is actually that kind of looms over what we're doing is in what ways the current context will call for new perspectives on innovation. And I just came from Finland, and again sitting in a kind of a semi it was actually an academic conference where policymakers were participating. And it's always this question of competition versus collaboration, because on the one hand, this whole transformation calls for different collaborative efforts. At the same time, innovation in its going back to Schumpeter is really about creative destruction and a means for competition. So, where is the balance? And it's, you come to, obviously there is no either or here, but it is a mix. And the question is then, when do you collaborate and when do you compete? And again, back to Schumpeter. Many years ago, I was reading Schumpeter, and I came across another book that pointed out the fact that Schumpeter puts the entrepreneur in the center, and from there everything evolves. But where does the entrepreneur come from? This puts attention to the early phases of innovation and the question of entrepreneurial discovery, and that sometimes we under conditions of uncertainty we actually need cooperation. And the question is then how to set up the institutions for that. The book that I came across was Jason Potts' book about the innovation commons, and I put that in the hand of Lina, and I guess that was a fatal thing, because all of a sudden it took shape in a way that I could never have imagined. And here we are. So Lina, You have over the last year worked quite a lot, and you pushed Jason on what was my question at that point. When we do conceptual development, we always have to do the kind of the theoretical framing and all sorts of things. But at some point, someone will ask you the hard question. So, what does this mean in practice? I know that you have also, with your colleagues now, tried to put this into practice. And here we are with Jason. So why don't we have a conversation with him about precisely what he has, how his thinking has evolved since the book, and also what you're actually doing in Karlstad. I am very, very curious to hear about that. So please, Lina, and I see we have also Anders from Anders Jonsson here from UNECE. I can see that the two of you are already on the top of your on sort of on the toes here. Please, without further ado, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I should mention also that we're sending live from Karlstad, the innovation hub of the world, for today and tomorrow. And we had a really good conference today where we actually talked about the innovation commons by looking at history and Victorian England, coffee houses, forests in Athens. It's a way of, when you look at how innovation has happened in history, you see the innovation commons all over. So I think here we would like to take this concept and analyze it and try to understand what it means in practice. We of course have here in Karlstad, in Lina, and in colleagues here, people who are very active in trying to do so. And we would like to ask Jason Potts how his message came through. Now, how do we put this into practice? So, but first, let's do just a little bit of theory to explain what the innovation commons means. So, Jason, if you could tell us a little bit about why you get interested in it, what you mean by it, where we see the innovation commons, where we don't see it, and maybe what is the difference with concepts like ecosystem, and how do we place that, and what is the added value of the commons?
Thanks, Anders. Just to start with, I'm absolutely thrilled that people are picking up on this idea and using it. It's one of these things that struck me as kind of obvious, and it was a, you know, I've been working in the Schumpeterian tradition for about 25 years, and it was a slow, gradual awareness that something was fundamentally missing from it, and where it was missing was right at the beginning, at the question of, you know, what are the resources that entrepreneurs work with? And it's a, you know, the whole sort of Schumpeterian theory is, you know, in the beginning is the entrepreneur and the startup firm, and then the process begins, and it's, you know, creative destruction and competition and venture finance and all of those things. But it was starting with a firm and an entrepreneur and then the inputs into that. And what was, you know, all of the sort of work that I'd been doing, studying sort of very early stage tech, that didn't quite bear out. What we were seeing was a whole lot of, you know, things that are sometimes described as clusters, where it turns out that a lot of innovation and, you know, new industries tend to all start in the same place. And they go, well, it must be the geography, or it must be the native something there. And what myself and my team sort of gradually realized when we were looking into particular ones was that what was going on was essentially the sort of Elinor Ostrom insight that a common pool resource was being created. And that common pool resource was being created around the nature of the opportunity, trying to figure out what it was. And often the starting point was just, we've got some tech, we've got some exciting new tech, and we can do this. So what, right? What economic, you know, the difference between we've got some tech that can do this and this creates economic value was this huge gap called opportunity discovery. And, you know, the Schumpeterian myth is that the entrepreneur just sees that, or there's a sort of lone genius, or there's a lucky accident where they see the opportunity and off they go. And sometimes that happens, but almost every situation we were looking at was what was actually happening was a whole lot of people just stumbling around, playing with the thing. Here's what we can do with this, and here's that, and whatever. You often saw it, it was often around universities or around sort of situations where people were sort of quite comfortable collaborating. And, this is a theory of cooperation, theory of the institutions of cooperation. But the other sort of part of it was to recognize the incredible uncertainty. There was very, very high levels of uncertainty that had to be overcome. Just no one knew what the opportunity was, or no one knew what the business model was, or no one knew what particular laws you were breaking if you tried to do the thing. And it was that sort of pooling of experimental discovery, often negative things as much as positive things. It blew up horribly this way, or these people got really angry with me when I did this, or we found a source of supply there, or whatever. And that sort of that institution for creating a resource, which was the mostly information. Some of it was actual physical resources or things, but mostly it was information that entrepreneurs could use that as the source for figuring out what the opportunity was. Once you've got it, bang, off you go. Right now we can start a company. Often the company had actually started, but then now we can do the thing. And that moment that's when the Schumpeterian story normally starts, is the entrepreneur sees the opportunity and pushes the button for go, and maybe they succeed, maybe they don't. But if you look at any early stage technology, what happens is there's this weird sort of either scientific advance or whatever going, that's odd, we've got a new thing. And then at some point later, economic value is created from it. So what Innovation Commons is just the institutions that get you from we've got a new thing in the world to discovery of economic value that includes the business model, the sources of supply, the pricing models, the contracting forms, the organizational forms, maybe the intellectual property. But this was the sense in which the Schumpeterian story, which is interesting and fundamentally true from that point onwards, had completely missed that aspect. And the reason it had missed it was there was no record keeping. Right? There's no application for a license for something. It was all social, informal situations where once it had happened, it just become stories, myth. So what we sort of realized is you start to see it everywhere once you start to look, but it had never. But it was a crucial institution for doing that, and so we started looking at why. So the next question is, why is the Commons the best institution for that? Why not a firm? Why not a public good? Why not another different type of institution? And sometimes that would be the case. Sometimes a large enough firm or a thing could do that, but mostly just Commons they're very economically efficient mechanisms. They're cheap, they're fast, they're low cost. They're an economizing institution that works to create a valuable resource under high uncertainty. And that's the sort of theory of Innovation Commons. What's interesting about it is that when it works, it'll collapse, and we'll have normally then the standard sort of industrial dynamics will kick off. But you also might mistake it for a cluster, for a geography, because it often happens in a place and you go, that was the magic of the geography there that caused that. It's like, no, it was the institution. So that's the sort of long form theory about what was going on there.
See these institutions today, and where do we not see them? You talk a lot about digitalization and crypto economics. We talked before about the value of data. So talk a little bit about where we already have it, maybe a few examples, and where we need it and why, and what you actually mean by institutions.
Yeah. So I saw you had the history of coffee houses or things like that. So first of all, it's a community. It's a community of people who are enthusiastic or interested in a particular, usually technology, but it doesn't have to. They've got a common interest in a thing. some of the social institutions could be, we're meeting at a particular place, a coffee house, or often universities are quite good for that, not because they're centers of great learning and whatever. They're hubs where people come together and feel safe sharing ideas, or the culture of that works. A lot of internet community forums fulfill this role that enables it to work without geography. But the crucial thing is just a community and governance around that community. The community has to sort of trust each other. They have to have a way to police for bad actors coming in. And this was why when we looked at things like sports, where you see a lot of, most sports begin with, here's a weird new technology, we can do a thing. And then you try and figure out the sport, like we add rules to it, or we make this whatever. And, just most modern sports begin with a weird new technology. Now we can slide down mountains, or we can bike on things. Then you have a community that sort of figures out how to make it fun, how to make it safe, how to make it exciting. And they sort of need to trust each other. They need to be able to share what I found, or things like that. So there has to be some kind of social or cultural or governance mechanism just to enable that process to work. It's not this. It's crucially not the same as a public good. It's not open. Almost every innovation commons we've studied was selective. It was gated. You had to do something to get in. And the classic sort of hackerspace one that or makerspaces, was makerspaces and hackerspaces are usually amazing innovation commons, but the gatekeeping is you've got to have some technical skills. You've got to be able to you've got to do something hard to get in, and once you're in, then people will share information with you. Homebrew Computer Club, for instance, it's one of the greatest innovation commons of the modern era. It created the modern world, but that was if you turned up to that, you had to present a talk about your code. You couldn't just turn up and just take stuff. You had to do something hard, and that kind of community governance seems to be a crucial aspect of how innovation commons works.
I think I got extremely inspired when I read your book, and suddenly I started looking through the lens of commons and collective action on more or less everything we did, and then I started to realize that from a policy perspective of what kind of innovation ecosystem development activities that get funded from the funders, the governmental agencies, etc. We started to see a pattern. We had this idea that if Wikipedia would be invented, would that even get funded? And we started realizing that a lot of these innovation projects that are funded because it's supposed to support innovation, they are treated as kind of a research project or a consultancy project where you have a problem and you deliver a solution and then the project is over. So if I can borrow one of your metaphors, we can remove the enemies of innovation. If we want more, I love that one. If we want more eggs, we can feed the chickens or we can shoot the foxes, right? But what we seemed to do, or the experience in the innovation system here, was that there was a lot of chicken feeding, but still not very many eggs. So it's that, like, looking into that, it's like, why is that? I mean, we have a great innovation agency and we have a great innovation tradition, but somehow all these fantastic innovation projects with skilled people trying to gather information, publish, create these kind of resource pools, they don't survive after the funding is over. And we started saying that this must be something. The collective action is something that's there when you develop a project, falls afterwards. So we started saying, first of all, there is a kind of entrepreneurial aspect to this. You start building something, you see if you can attract, not necessarily market in this case, but a community. You might know that, but you need to get a snowball rolling somehow. Is there a need for whatever you're trying to gather? Is someone interested, etc.? So it's not only that kind of entrepreneurial discovery aspect. It's also the governance model, as you pointed out, that has to be developed from the start, just as the business model in the startup has to be developed from the start. You need to have a hypothesis, test it, move it forward, etc. And another aspect as well that have come across as super crucial is the information infrastructure, the technology, since we're no longer based around the same coffee machine necessarily, especially for us here in Karlstad. We need to communicate with each other, but different kind of aspects just were much more important, and they were not necessarily taken into account when innovation projects was funded. So the result was like, when you had the idea like, we're going to create this amazing resource that so many people can use, you get the funding, you produce that pool of resources, and the minute the funding stops, the project dies.
Yeah.
Maybe Shilhawk, I see how you like hold the microphone now, but
to another topic, but
yeah,
we can continue this forward.
Yeah. No, but what do you, from your point of view, have you seen like, if we say that, okay, we still have chicken food, we want to feed chickens, how can that be done in a way that stimulates the innovation commons?
Yeah. So feeding chickens enormously politically popular. Like no one ever votes against that, right? So it's the for political reasons, vote getting reasons. That's sort of why we do that. Whereas shooting foxes or just being against enemies of innovation, politically toxic. You pay a very high price when you do that, but that is the thing you need to do. And so you've just got a fundamental sort of contradiction between the political incentives and the sort of innovation entrepreneurial incentives around this whole, how do we get more of the thing we want? So there's that, right? This is a genuinely hard political problem because you need political support to do the thing, but all the political incentives line up around the sort of subsidy approach, because you can give things to your friends and they'll like you for it. Or you punish your enemies and they'll hate you for it, and then no one lasts long doing that. So it requires a very courageous action. Generally needs to be more bureaucratic or civil service rather than political. But beside the point, I think that the higher level observation here is just about what we need, what policy should be trying to do, and this starts with just what is the innovation problem. And I think Ken Arrow, bless him, one of the greatest economists that ever lived, but he sort of set us off down a bit of a wrong path on this one. And the Ken Arrow approach to the innovation problem was that it was a market failure problem, and we need to solve that by creating a rent, IP, which is useful, powerful, but or a subsidy equivalent to the rent. Right? You're overcoming a problem that was effectively identified as early stage finance. So that's you don't have enough eggs to start, we'll give you some eggs. But the idea that was the problem, the economic problem, completely missed the significance of just asking the question, what are the resources that entrepreneurs need? And sure, they need finance, and they need finance once they've figured out what they're going to do. There's a stage when they need that, but the primary resource they need is information, and that the crucial thing is that information is highly uncertain, highly distributed, and only of value when it's put together in particular ways. Now, sort of part of the entrepreneurial task is to see that, to sort of to put the pieces together and go, there it is, there's the opportunity. But the innovation resource that needs to be created is that information, and that is a function, right? And so how do you do that? Well, it's this is the sort of creating infrastructure or institutions to create incentives to do that, and that's very different from creating. We take taxes from there and we move them to there, and then innovation happens. That's a completely different pathway to the types of resources that are needed. And the more radical the technology, the more important this first stage is. And often we've been lucky, or particular places have been lucky that they've been able to do that and figure it out, or there's there's a whole sort of series of lucky accidents that often happen to create that. And the question of what does policy look like? Is this, what type of policy is that? Is it a systems policy or a network policy, or what even is it? But I think that's what the innovation commons sort of theory is trying to address. It's just trying to understand how you deal with that. Yeah.
Do you hear me? Yeah. Now I think my question was, or my thoughts were linking to the foxes and chickens, because we usually think about part innovation, products or services to be developed utilizing new technology, and that's usually done within the existing or prevailing socio-technical regime. Now, and you also claiming that it some way disappears when somebody finds a path to value creation. Now, what happens if you are really in a situation where you want to change the prevailing socio-technical regime? Because then you are in a systemic change, you are in a system innovation kind of situation where you are really in another completely like context, and linking to this kind of, you have to create new value networks, like Christensen was writing a book. It doesn't, you cannot appear when the first succeeds. You really have to create a long-lasting community that has an interest in finding the right kind of experiments that work, how to scale it, because then you have the resource coordination problems, and how do you really move into the prevailing and don't see that the foxes are eating up the hens that has been scaling up from chickens. So if you could comment on this kind of, when you are really in a situation, you are not working within the prevailing socio-technical regime, but you are really trying to do this kind of disruptive system changes, and the how do you work with commons and the role of commons in that kind of new situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing to note is that commons is they don't naturally form, right? So when they do form, it's often they're being bootstrapped by a community that's excited about stuff and has a reason to be together. So the way you get them is sort of you pay with it comes out of community reasons. It was an empirical observation that when we looked at innovation commons in history, we observed that they kept collapsing. Right, that's not a good thing. We want them to continue, but they would last. They would do their thing. Someone would figure something out, and then just everyone would go, all right, off we go to do the thing. And again, the Homebrew Computer Club was the classic example of that. And it was Bill Gates that collapsed it. Specifically, he left. So this question of how we design an innovation commons, how we enable them to persist, how we enable them to persist through multiple phases when there's the initial reasons why someone might be there might not be enough. So they do need support. They're fragile, I guess. Again, this is why sort of universities tend to be quite good at them, because they're persistent and they have new people coming through, and they're usually sort of quite good environments for that. So they can, so we do know how to build them, but no university thinks of itself as an innovation commons. It's an institution of learning and research, and that's why we exist. And there's this weird accidental thing that keeps happening. Again, places like Stanford are just the classic examples of this. So we do know how to build them, but we keep building them by accident, and which means that we keep killing them by accident as well, and so on. So I think there is my sort of sense of this is that this is something that we possibly can design well. If we can understand from history why have they worked, if we can understand a broad, if we can develop a theory of how these things work, and then this question of who supports them, who funds, what is the business model for these things. But I think to a first approximation, if we're going to have innovation policy, I would rather it look like this. Trying to create and support a mostly information resource. What you're fundamentally sort of seeing is that an innovation commons is about creating an institution that incentivizes the creation of a resource, that incentivizes you to push things in. And the basic logic there is I can only take something out of the pool if I put something into the pool. And that's why they're a bit club-like, right? So that's why that's why they have boundaries. You're only allowed to join an innovation commons or participate in one if you've got something to contribute. But if you're in, you can take from the resource. And that's the classic definition of a commons in the Elinor Ostrom sense, that it's a community that governs and shepherds a resource that you contribute to and take from, but there's rules. So that's the sort of first aspect of it. So what does a created innovation commons look like if it was policy? What it's fundamentally doing is it's supporting that. So it's providing it might be a place, a resource. It's enabling information to come in and it's moving it outwards. So exactly sort of more knowledge networky type things is what that is. But it's also a governed community. It's focused. It's around a particular technology or opportunity, and it becomes a focal point for sort of subsequent entrepreneurial development. So you'd expect venture capitalists to be interested in supporting it. You'd expect sort of other sort of firms that have complementary investments in the tech or in the downstream markets to be interested in supporting it. And I think what actually happens in practice is that a lot of innovation commons just kind of accidentally or spontaneously emerge. And Silicon Valley is a spectacular innovation commons, but because of the culture, there's particular bars that you go to, and everyone talks about stuff, and the way that labor markets work, people can move around very easily. There's sort of a culture of sort of sharing very fast-moving information, and part of that is about not killing it. So there's a bunch of sort of laws that don't apply there, particularly around sort of exit clauses or restrictions on things. So you can I think they're fragile. They can be supported, but they're very easily killed by
Yes, I would also like to say that we can start opening up if any one of you. I see we have quite a bunch of curious humans in the online with us. So if you have any questions that you want to add to the discussion, please write them in the chat. And Jakob is your friend, and he will talk for you. I was just going to continue on this aspect that you need to contribute in order to use something, and that, I think that's quite an interesting aspect in itself, because I mean the way if I go back to kind of the normal innovation projects, kind of the classic work package 6 communication and dissemination, that has very little to do with that. It's like we build a website, we put something on the repository, we might post things on LinkedIn, and we might have different kind of seminars or publications or this and that. It's essentially one way thing. So when you look into, if you want to do it like a two-way thing, if I draw the parallel to a conference paper that I found online where we wrote about the Schumpeter innovation and the von Hippel innovation, I saw like a parallel to, if you think that the one using whatever you have produced also can contribute to it and make it better, that adds a whole new perspective on the technological side, because then aspects like traceability, for example, becomes super important, which is completely irrelevant if you just like publish your information as a public good. Would you like to comment on that?
So the other sort of aspect, so I came toward innovation commons from the Schumpeterian perspective, but one of the first people that sort of reached out was Eric von Hippel and said, you're describing user innovation. And what he meant by that is that the sort of the model of the von Hippel household user innovator that creates something just for themselves or their children or whatever, and then innovates for free, like without intellectual property and without trying to start a market. The other part of that story is that they often then connect up with other people doing the same thing. So there's lots of examples, particularly in sports innovation, weirdly medical devices, where you've got medical devices that need modification for very niche or very rare diseases or conditions or sort of things that aren't big enough to warrant a sort of a company sort of coming in and making the investments and undertaking the risk to do that, but it's crucial, like it needs to happen, or your child suffers or something like that. And that sort of situation where these sort of medical device, and I'm thinking of the artificial pancreas, which was a user innovation thing. They'll start to form a community of patients or a community of people with the same problem, and they'll start sharing information about things. And what Eric sort of pointed out was that that's an innovation commons, right? You're starting to have information that's pooling around the technology, the risks involved, the safety aspects, the how do you use it, the dosage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what's also happening is that medical device manufacturers start to pay attention. They go, okay, there's something here. And they can sort of start to see something going from we didn't even know whether there was demand for that. No, there is. There's these people want it. And you can start to sort of, so you sort of start to have the beginnings of this process that then feeds back into producer innovation, where the medical device manufacturers will pick that up and take that. Now, the users might go, fine, great, have it. This is magical. Now we can buy it off you instead of us having to make it, and this is great. It may go a path of intellectual property. It may be like, we invented this and you have to license it from us or whatever. But most of the examples that sort of Eric was introducing was actually the user community was just grateful that producers would come in and do something. They would improve the manufacturing, make it reliable, or make it safe. But the actual functional innovation was all users. So this whole sort of space of user household innovation is also an example of innovation commons, where the commons sort of emerges on the back of, or directly behind, or as soon as the community starts to form.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jason. And as you know, in the audience, we are trying to simulate this fireside chat. So I have a broad set of audience actually who do have questions. So please let me introduce the first question, which is from Len. And if you can, you have your camera on. And we actually have a small screen here. So Jason, you will see Len here. Please ask your question.
Thanks, Jakob, and thanks very much, Jason, for a very interesting talk. I'm going to ask a question on something you trailed at the very start, but I don't think you've addressed during the talk itself. So just to kind of clarify, can you tell me the difference between a commons and an entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yeah, so they have different institutional governance. So a commons, first of all, has no prices in it. There's no intellectual property, or there's no sort of strong property rights. What the purpose of a commons is to create a pooled resource and the governance of the use of that. Whereas an innovation ecosystem is a set of more or less trading or contracting relationships. Like it's clearly it's clearly a bunch of firms that are specialized in particular ways, that interact along particular patterns of specialization. And you slot into an ecosystem and you occupy a position in that with respect to this firm and that firm. But it's basically a pattern of specialization. And as the ecosystem evolves, the pattern of specialization changes. You've got competition to occupy those niches. Creative destruction will shift around where those specializations are. Maybe they'll emerge into particular firms and agglomerate. But it's a complex contractual exchange structure of production, whereas a commons is a pool. A commons is the institutional wrapping around a common pool resource. And the resource is valuable to the extent that it has to be created by people contributing to it or protecting it or doing something, but it's a single resource. Now, in the case of innovation commons, it's usually an information or data resource. And the reason it's valuable is that you use it as an input to innovation. The input is discovery of opportunity or figuring out that. But it's a commons is a type of production. producing a resource, whereas an innovation ecosystem is a structure of production.
I want to add to perhaps a bit different view of it, but since this is a fire chat, but I agree completely that commons is a resource pool. That's the big difference. But in our view, we define ecosystem as you know the habitat, the life conditions for a group of organizations, and then we sit compared to, for example, value change and others. It's a non-contractual thing. But you are agreeing. It's more like a formalized community that is long-lasting. That this is the way the life conditions for certain things are organized. So we agree on how a car should look like, or what kind of technologies work, and which relationship are important, and kind of regulations around it, and the rules for the play and such. That's the ecosystem. But the pool of common resources, that's the innovation. I completely agree with.
I completely agree with that characterization as well. I think I was just describing the internal architecture of it.
I think we are agreeing.
It's a broad sort of environment of rules and conditions and resources that frames are.
Thank you very much for that. Online, we also have Emily, and I know you are on the run, so we will not see you on the camera, but we would love to hear your lovely voice and your question. Please enter the stage, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Jakob, and thanks, Jason, for your introductory talk. And my question is a bit similar to Lynn's. So I've been working in the field of cluster policy for about 20 years, and I see similarities between a cluster initiative and an innovation commons, and the difference between a cluster as an agglomeration of a systemic, a system of actors, and a cluster initiative where certain actors in that agglomeration decide to do things together in a collaborative way. And I'm wondering how you see the difference, or if you see a difference between a cluster initiative and these kind of other systemic innovation platforms, or whatever they may be called, and an innovation commons. Are they the same type of institutions for collaboration, or do you see other differences between something like a cluster initiative and an innovation platform and an innovation commons?
Yeah, it's a good question as well. So it's a tough one, because this is one of these things that I think a lot of innovation policy turns on these distinctions. So a cluster, I understand a cluster in terms of spillovers. A cluster is a structure of spillovers. So ecosystem is a structure of specializations. A cluster is a structure of spillovers. And the reason you join a cluster is to get the spillovers, and the dynamics of a cluster is the dynamics of those spillovers. And often the engineering or policy of a cluster is to try and create the first spillover that creates the second one, that creates the third one, which means that the architecture of a cluster is usually geographic. It's usually a place. If I'm there and then you locate next to me, then we've got spillovers and we can measure them. And so clusters have one nice property, is that you can there's something to measure. You're trying to measure spillovers, and you can evaluate them by the extent to which that happens. The fundamental, so a commons isn't evaluated by its spillovers. It's actually evaluated by the emergence of a resource that wasn't there before. So we can argue about whether that is the same thing, but the crucial difference in an innovation commons is deal with uncertainty. They fundamentally create a resource under conditions of extreme uncertainty, where if it didn't exist, nothing happens. Whereas in a cluster, you've got the firm doing the thing and the spillovers. So it's still, a cluster that's not working very well is still just a bunch of firms, just with no spillovers. Whereas in innovation commons, if it's not working very well, just nothing happens. And you'll never know that the innovation discovery never happened, because the critical resource just never emerged in the first place. So I think that sort of that fundamental 0-1 difference. Clusters are an additionality. They take a thing and they make it a bit better, and that's a you can measure it, and policy can do that, and everyone's happy. Whereas innovation commons, when they work, they can be spectacular. And when they don't work, you never knew that anything didn't happen. That situation is all around us. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I want to link to what you said about this uncertainty and operating under uncertainty, and how that changes kind of the rules of the game, and link to that this policy report that we wrote as a result of the pre-study about innovation commons and commons for innovation ecosystem development that Vinnova just funded. And in there we came to 4 conclusions or 4 policy recommendations if we want to stimulate commons by innovation policy, so to say. And we said that the first one is that we need to increase the knowledge of what commons is and how that can be used, so that more people can put these glasses on and see what that is, so we can start exchanging ideas, exchanging experiences. We need to link a bit of strategic learning to this. Like if we experiment with trying to stimulate commons, we need to also share information and experience around it. Otherwise, experiments is just a waste of time, basically. So that was the first. The second, we said we need to, as we talked about before, we need to think about how can we finance this kind of institution or this kind of attempts if we accept that we are working in extreme uncertainty. That will most likely be more of a venture capitalist approach with like a portfolio approach, more stage-wise funding, small risks in the beginning, etc. Meaning like embracing the complexity and uncertainty of it. The third one we've been into already when we said that we need to start looking at what kind of technological possibilities do we have, given that the lead users of the innovation ecosystem, so to say, might not be the ones that are on top of blockchain or knowledge graphs or this not. So how can we as lead users of the innovation ecosystem benefit from the technological revolution that we're currently seeing? And the fourth one I would like to have an input on, and that is how we can value which commons that actually create some value, given that normally you have the price as value situation. If you invest in startups, for example, you measure value by price in different aspects, but here we'll rather see how are things used, what is developed from there, which value does that create, which more similar to normally what you have with the kind of research funding, but here we want to use a different model, but still link that to users' value. Here, and this fourth one, we have currently, we realize here we need to do more work, we need more, hopefully get some pre-study or some kind of project funding to start digging into that. But if you can give us some ideas and help us a little bit to get started, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. So we've been thinking long and hard about that, and it is a hard problem because the answer. I mean, I think we have an answer, but it's not you need to spend $1 bazillion on that. It's basically a long list of small things that you're sort of trying to get right or tweak and so on. So step one, recognize it exists, right? So there's just a fundamental absence of an understanding that this resource, which sometimes magically appears, also often doesn't appear. And just that understanding that when it happens, it's not just a random sort of strike of lightning. It was because a commons formed, which in practice means a community got together, organized themselves, were able to sort of govern themselves, to cooperate successfully, to create a resource that they all valued, and was valuable. So they wanted to participate. They cooperated in the participation, and they drew value from it. And when all of those conditions happen, you've got a successful commons. And the evidence of that is twofold. One, something happened, and just suddenly entrepreneurship. And often that existence of entrepreneurship is mismeasured. It's like, it was because of the funding that came in. It's like, no, the funding was going to come anyway, right? Once you've got the entrepreneur opportunity. The funding was following the existence of that discovery. So it's almost, but often that gets credited. So you're counting the wrong thing. But the best evidence of what success looks like is just that a community of early stage lead users were voluntarily, enthusiastically participating. So you're counting, you're looking for, it's not, you're not looking for prices, you're looking for activity. And when you see that activity, it's like, great, that's what we want to see. But the second thing is, you have to look hard to find it, because almost with every radical new technology, that group of people will often do it in secret, or they'll it's not going to be visible. They're not going to register at the sort of thing where you write your names down, and like there's no natural record of that. It's often maybe journalists will discover it, or it'll be sort of niche things. But it's an emergent, voluntary, civil society, community thing, and like all of the greatest things in history, that's what it is. And all you want to do is support it, or not harm it, or create conditions where it's more likely to occur. It's a high trust, high cooperation sort of context. So so there are certain places that's more likely to happen. Right? So when we look through history, so we went back and tried to find all the innovation commons in history, and you find them in particular places. But it wasn't an accident. It was sort of coffee houses in Amsterdam, and the sort of engineering halls and the best sort of technical universities. There were particular places you kept finding them. And I think what's interesting now is the idea that these things might be forming in new places. So we start to find them online, and they start to be these sort of secret communities. And the example I'll give you is Bitcoin. That was a secret, right? That was anonymous people meeting in weird corner, like even the internet's a weird place, but these were weird corners of the internet. That not using, there was no way anyone would have ever found that. But yet, $1 trillion later, amazing innovation commons. So the idea that these things, but that was one. The reason they were anonymous was that they were scared of going to prison. Right? That was one where they were actively hunted from forming. So again, with the foxes and the eggs thing, it's not necessarily that they need support. It's just that they need to be recognized that they exist. They're generally good. They're not just good, but they're sources of the thing that we want the most, which is origin of innovation and therefore economic growth and prosperity. But here we are, 2024. Discussing whether these things actually exist. And step one, just sensible policy is just to start there with, okay, all right, they seem to exist. We want to develop a policy or a framework around them. And step one is that they exist and that they're good. And at the moment, neither of those conditions generally holds.
I repeat myself now with the mic on. Please, Carlos Mejia, the floor is yours. Very welcome.
Thank you very much. Could we think the innovation commons to develop alternative exchange solutions beyond money for the traction of socio-productive systems?
Sorry, I don't quite understand that.
Can we think the innovation commons in alternative exchange solutions?
Yeah, interesting question. I think they can evolve into that. And this idea of how do innovation commons evolve, and can you overlay them with additional market structure or trading structure or sort of other can you make them more sophisticated and more capable? We've been doing a lot of work recently studying what we're calling contribution systems. And contribution systems are sort of a new thing that's evolving out of a combination of open source software development, or just situations where you've got communities coming together to collectively produce something, and open source software is the classic example of that. But the problem with open source software is that no one gets paid. So the question is, how would you try and build incentive mechanisms or ways in which the values downstream created could come back to those that contributed to it? And interestingly, the answer is DeFi. So one of the things that sort of a lot of blockchain type mechanisms have done is that they've created new technologies that are very, very good at recording real-time events that happened in a distributed context. So you need identity, who did something, and what did they do? And then we sort of attach a token to that, and if you hold the token, you've got a ledger record of something that, if 1,000 years later or 3 days later or whatever, some value is created from it, we can trace back who did the thing. And we can use, and one of the ones I'm working with is using essentially a variation of the Google PageRank algorithm to sort of evaluate the relationship between the contribution and the value created. So now a firm would normally do that, where you've got an employment contract, a manager on deciding we're going to make this thing is worth that, your share is wages, blah, blah, blah. But there's a relationship between the contribution, the worker, and the product that was created. But what these sort of new types, if we think about how could innovation commons evolve, is that the next step for their evolution is just they're coming together to create a common pool resource. It's valuable. Innovation commons in history so far have mostly been as an entrepreneurial resource, but they could go downstream. They could continue to sort of add things in that. So I think that's why it's such an interesting question. That I think innovation commons they're an institution, right? They're an institution for creating a resource, and institutions themselves can evolve. One of the ways they can evolve is we can add tech to them. We can add algorithms and identity management and other sorts of things. Traditionally, they're quasi-anonymous. They're pooling equilibria, and then they just collapse, right? They're very primitive organisms, but they could definitely evolve to become more interesting, complex. But how they would do that is basically smart contracts, AI, more digital technology to them.
I would like to build on this idea, as you said, that normally these individuals contributing are not being paid. It's not normally part of their day job, and that's also one of the cornerstones in Fonipel. But one thing I would like to share is an observation that I think with this recent development the last years, with the post-pandemic, basically with all the digital tools, and these limits between work and not work is a bit more fuzzy. So to say, work is not where you are at from 9 to 5, and the rest of the part is a free time. It's more like people tend to work. It's a bit difficult to tell what is work nowadays. And if you link that to what we see, at least in public sector here in Sweden, that many of the employees now that we're working with in public sector are very engaged people. They're very curious. We're very far from this idea that public sector is a place where you have your steady income, and if you don't have too many ambitions, you can work in public sector. That's a very kind of old way of seeing that. Many of the most engaged and intelligent people I work with are working as public sector officials, and they're getting paid, but they work more hours than they're supposed to do, so to say, for their wage. And part of that time, they tinker around and they deal with people, they write, they share. So a lot of these kind of innovation commons, typical household activities are now performed by people as a part of their role, but not necessarily during working hours, but it's still kind of a part of their professional role. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting observation, because what it opens up the possibility of is just far more complex compensation mechanisms, where you've got a base salary that's a kind of civil service salary. Fine, you can do that, but if you do anything more that's contributing to these things, we've got a sort of mechanism for bringing that value back. Now, the reason we didn't do this in the past was just transactions costs. So it was just crazy expensive. There's no way that would have made sense. But if it's digital end-to-end, if it's algorithmic end-to-end, you've got the dramatic fall in the cost of actually doing those types of things. So I think the opportunity for just new types of institutional mechanisms that are that previously would have been massively too complex to implement. But we want this to happen. We want that, we want that type of creation of a resource that can drive power, that is an input into innovation entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Linking back to that, just to comment on how you see this kind of, I'm back in this kind of creating sustainability in this. And one of the things that we have been discussing and looking into is how you turn community actions into new ecosystems. And have you studied, for example, the Internet Task Force, or I was personally involved in the CCITT was one, because that was creating you really provided contribution because you saw the win-win situation long term, because then you can compete on the commons. Yeah. And have you studied that? And because that creates other kind of incentives of creating these, turning communities into ecosystems or through their action.
Yeah. No, I haven't studied that one, but that is a great example. And we know that those sort of standards bodies, or those groups of people come together to make a technology useful, and the way you make it useful is you enable it to interact with other things, which is the standards problem, classic sort of public goods problem. But it wasn't solved as a public good; it was solved as a sort of club, a community of people that just we need to do this. And I mean, what my theory of what's going on there is that it's the same thing as the makerspaces, that the standards engineers, to join the thing, you've got to be a sufficiently good sort of, electrical engineer and, whatever. So that's the entry condition. But once you're in there, now I've got all my new friends who are amazing electrical engineers. And I get to see what, I get access to what are you working on and what are you building and who can I hire and are they good? And you get all this information that is relevant for you starting your business or building your thing. Now, the entry ticket there was you've got to do the committee work and you've got to vote on the standards and try and figure out what the correct one is, right? So there's an obvious hurdle to join. But once you're inside, I mean, those things were just, huge just sources of startup firms that came from that. And again, it wasn't an accident. There were those standards associations. The reason people joined them wasn't just out of the goodness of their engineering hearts. It was
champions. Yeah. There's always champions.
Yeah. But again, it's a filtering. It's a sort of filtering mechanism for people that can bring high quality information. And those things are hard to create, right? If you're in Bell Labs and all of your colleagues are just geniuses, great, that's a good place. If you're in a top university and all of your fellow students are just amazing, great, you've got that situation. But those aren't naturally occurring situations; those are highly artificial. But where you sort of see those engineering considerations like that. But if you look at things like new sports, this is why sports is so interesting to study, because that's just pure community, right? It's the invention of mountain biking, invention of downhill skiing didn't come from the great universities, right? Or the great research laboratories. It was just a bunch of people who figured out you could do a stupid thing and found some friends who could do it with it. But from that, all of the great sort of, the industry was born and the firms all came out of that. And this is why sports, you see this in mountain biking and surfing and skiing and just all of the front, and what those things are is just a weird new, usually material that has some interesting properties, and we could do this with it. But if you look downstream from those, all of the big sort of sports clothing companies or the sort of manufacturers, they were all there in the beginning. Just a bunch of friends who were just playing around with the thing, trying to figure out how not to kill themselves.
That's lovely to hear. The next question is from a serial entrepreneur called Stephanie. And I know you are online and you are on.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very inspiring talk. Thank you. I'm thinking about innovation commons, and if I understand right, technology are enabling innovation commons. Do you see any influence from crisis? So Corona, but also a Cold War with the innovation commons, the starting, but also the growth of that. Is there influence or maybe a push on?
Yeah, interesting. One place we have seen that is around, the whole sort of Corona thing was a forcing function for making things digital remote, right? So a whole lot of stuff, in my world, that was universities had for 30 years tried to figure out how to do online education. We couldn't do it, and it was too hard and impossible. And then a week later, we figured out how to do it. And I think that kind of sort of coordinated forcing function. So the thing about sort of the coronavirus pandemic was not just that it was a forcing function, it forced a new behavior online first. It was also coordinated. Everyone had to experience it at the same time. So that clearly accelerated things. But I think there's a number of different origins of it. So the one that we were traditionally studying was just weird new technologies that no one quite knew what it was. So just a new property in the world. And inventions, the path from invention to innovation is not, new technologies don't arrive fully labeled. They're not, this is a new polymer and this is what you do with it and here's who will buy it and here's what it's for. It's just, here's this weird new polymer, it has these properties. Who knows? And that sort of process of discovery is one direction where you have innovation commons, where you just have people who are just interested in that. But the other one is the sort of, as you described, this sort of problem context where a bunch of people suddenly all have the same context of a problem and sort of come together and go, how are you solving it and what are you doing and here's what we're doing. And so, there's two distinct pathways. One is a weird new thing in the world that creates a community. The other one is this weird new problem in the world that induces a community. But in both cases, it was induce a community that we were trying to figure out what was going on or how to do it. But so that's the model, right? That something happens and a community emerges to try and figure out what this is or how to do that.
Great. We are going to hand over to Geneva in about 7 minutes. So does anyone want to do a last question? Anders has, yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to cram into one. Two for the price of one. So the first is the foxes analogy made me think about the cyberlens foxes and hedgehogs. So the foxes are the ones that look broadly, the hedgehogs are the ones that see only one problem. I submit the public sector tends to be a hedgehog. And so the question is, how do we turn the public sector into a fox, and how do we overcome the political problem that you discussed, and also perhaps most importantly, the information problem. Maybe we don't know what's going to happen. We have to discover this value. And how do we avoid many of the mistakes that have been made along the way? It's actually not that easy to think about cases where public policy has been actually catalytic. Yeah. That's the first question. The second is the humdinger of, as we discussed before, of a potential extremely valuable commons is, of course, data and tradability of high quality real-time data where we could exploit the benefits of the platform economy and also, as you discussed, of crypto economics, of new opportunities in value chains and service trade. How do we go about that? And what are some examples and ways that we can make progress towards using data better?
Yeah, let me start with the second question first, because I think to me that's the main thing I'm obsessed with now is this idea of data commons. So, first lesson is that commons are an institutional mechanism for creating a resource. That resource is often information. Weirdly, the most interesting resource to create now is data. Like that's by far the largest, most valuable, most underexploited, underutilized, but just massive resource as an input into entrepreneurship and innovation. and that we have in the world today. And most, I think most of my conjecture here is that the amount of the efficiency with which we're creating and using that resource is abysmal. And that's a weird thing to say, because we look at, if I go through the list of the top 20 just companies in the world and just go make a list of all the trillion-dollar companies, they're all data companies. Like, it should be obvious that this is a massively valuable global resource. But my conjecture is that if you look at what those companies are, they're basically ones that have figured out how to create and use and exploit data that haven't been blocked from doing so. And we were discussing this offline earlier around there's huge sources of data that could be pushed into the commons that currently aren't. The most obvious ones around transactions data, transport data, health data. We can make a list, and you go through that list and you go, well, it's obvious why that's not in the commons: privacy, ownership, legislation. There's lots of good reasons why that resource isn't there, but good political reasons and even good consumer-facing consumer reasons. But what we have is a situation where the single biggest resource on the planet right now as an input into innovation and entrepreneurship is used at maybe make up a number 10% of its capacity. And the opportunity there to release that, to create that, is not about creating the data. We need to, it's already there. What we need to is enable to get it out of where it currently is trapped, and usually trapped for legal, legislative cost reasons, of just the cost of pushing it in. So I think if there was a single innovation policy agenda for the next decade that I would, if I had a magic sort of wand and I could go, this is the only thing we're going to focus on, it would be getting the yottabytes of data that are currently in the economy into a place where they can be used effectively as an entrepreneurial innovation resource. And the great thing about that is everywhere. It's not the case that America only has the data, or in Europe has nothing. It's like everyone has got huge amounts of this. It's a evenly distributed global resource. But some sectors are very, very good at exploiting it, and they're the ones who go, wow, it's weird that there's all these trillion-dollar companies there. So it's not weird at all. There's a reason that that's happening. So that's true, and that was true before Gen AI comes in with this enormous appetite for training on data. I think this is going to be even more true in future years.
Thanks a lot for that. It's very interesting. I want to talk to all of you that are online. If you feel that you could listen to us forever and ever, we could talk about this forever and ever. I think we're going to continue tonight over beer, and we're going to continue also tomorrow at 10:30 online. Since I'm not by the computer, I cannot put the link in the chat, but if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you look at the post. Anders is doing that, my communicator, or he's his own. I don't own him, but he's communicator in the Compare Foundation. He will put the link in the chat for the seminar tomorrow. Then you will see here Kjell Håkan and me and Jason, and also Anders Jonsson talking from the regional perspective about Innovation Commons. So we will continue, and by that I will pass over to Geneva.
Thank you very much to you, Jason, and thank you very much to Lina, Jakob, Kjell, and Anders for a great session. It was really inspiring. And yeah, I'm happy to move over to our game segment of the series. So we like to not only ask our guests about their current work, but also hear a little bit more about them personally. So we have introduced this little game, 2 Lies and 1 Truth. And I would ask my colleagues to display the 3 phrases that we've received from Jason. Exactly. So I'll read them out, and then I'd ask everyone online and maybe even also in the room with the show of hands which statement you think is true about Jason. So the first is, when I was 16, I invented a theory of time travel involving orbiting black holes. The second, I was New Zealand's largest Angora rabbit farmer. And the third, I got suspended from school for running a stock market club focused on tail risk options trading. So all very interesting, interesting examples, and I invite everyone to take their guess as to which you think is true. And I'm just looking at the results now coming in. So yeah, I think the majority of our listeners think that the third phrase is true. I think there's a few more votes coming in, but I think that's the verdict. So we believe that the third sentence is true. But Jason, please tell us which one is the right one.
So I didn't get suspended, so it's not true. I was the third biggest Angora rabbit farmer, not the first, so that's not true. It was the first one, weirdly, which I accidentally discovered something, didn't realize this was when I was 16, was a very long time ago, before the internet, so it never occurred to me to actually check that was the case. And I only discovered when I saw an article in Time magazine about a month later about some scientists that had discovered it. So weird, very weird.
Very, very impressive. Well, that sounds very, very impressive. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I'll pass over back to Mikael.
Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic session, and yeah, we're experimenting ourselves, and it's kind of interesting sitting here and reflecting upon what we just heard, and this whole thing of commons and creating, how things also just happen. Had I known what I started when I put the hand in your book, Jason, in the hands of Lina. But that's the way it is, and I guess we've had a little bit of a common here, and hope it evolves to something even bigger. Thank you so much for all of you.